The air in Don Alessandro Marino's study was thick enough to drown in. It was a suffocating cocktail of aged cigar smoke, expensive whiskey, and the metallic tang of fealty sworn under duress. Shadows clung to the mahogany-paneled walls like old ghosts, their darkness broken only by the low, amber glow of a single desk lamp that made the Don's face a mask of menacing light and abyssal dark. From my corner of the room, I watched. It was what I did best. I had made an art of stillness, of blending into the background until I was nothing more than another piece of grim furniture. To these men, the Don's most trusted capos, brutes carved from marble and malice, I was Perlo de Luca. A name whispered with a mixture of fear and respect. Perlo the ghost. The Don's shadow. The enforcer who had appeared from nowhere and proven his loyalty with a chilling efficiency that left no room for questions. The name, like the man, was a lie. The Rinaldi dogs are at our door. Don Alessandro's voice was a low growl, the sound of gravel grinding against bone. He swirled the whiskey in his heavy crystal glass, the ice cubes clinking like a death knell. They send whispers into the dark, hoping to turn brother against brother. They mistake our patience for weakness. He paused, his obsidian eyes sweeping over the faces of his men. They were rapt, their loyalty absolute, their fear palpable. I felt nothing. My heart beat with the slow, steady rhythm of a clock, each tick a second closer to a future they couldn't imagine. But this family is bound by more than blood, the Don continued, his voice rising with a preacher's fervor. An oath binds it. The Marino name will not fall. Not while I breathe. He slammed the glass down on his desk, the sharp crack echoing in the tense silence. Not while my daughter lives. Valentina. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into a still, black pool. I had never met her. I had never even seen her. To me, she was a name in a file, a black and white photograph, a secondary objective. The daughter. The legacy. The final loose end to be tied off once the father was in the ground. My employer, Marco Rinaldi, had been explicit. Kill the Don. Rinaldi's voice had hissed over the encrypted lines 6 months ago, thin and sharp as a razor. The sound had been a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the Milan hotel room where I had received my mission. Cripple his organization. And when he's gone, eliminate the girl. A king is not truly dead until his bloodline is severed. He had called her the girl. A piece of collateral. An afterthought. In Don's study, however, she was something more. She was a symbol, an invocation, the very reason for this empire of blood and fear. My mission was to burn that empire to the ground, but these men spoke of her as if she were its sacred flame. The backstory Rinaldi had crafted for me was a masterpiece of tragedy and vengeance. Perlo de Luca, a man whose family was slaughtered in a territorial dispute, was saved from the wreckage by a low-level Marino soldier, forever indebted to the family that gave him a new purpose. It was a story designed to appeal to a man like Alessandro Marino, a man who saw loyalty not as a choice, but as a debt to be paid in blood. The lie took root the day of the ambush. The Don's motorcade, a procession of armored steel, was attacked in the narrow streets of Naples. It was a Rinaldi operation, designed to fail. A test. My test. I was a junior guard in the follow car, a nobody. When the chaos erupted, when the Don's personal guards fell, I moved. I didn't think. I reacted. My training, honed over a decade in the shadows, took over, 3 attackers down in 4 seconds. A 4th was disarmed with a broken wrist. I had shielded the Don's body with my own, taking a shallow graze from a ricochet on my shoulder as proof of my commitment. I had saved the man I was sent to kill. The irony was not lost on me, but it was a necessary step. Trust, in this world, wasn't given, it was forged in the crucible of violence. That night, Alessandro Marino looked at me, his eyes searching mine for the truth, and he saw what he wanted to see, a loyal soldier, a weapon he could wield. He promoted me, brought me into his inner circle, and made me his shadow. He had no idea the shadow was there to consume the light. My true name was Lucian Rosa. And my only loyalty was to the man who had pulled me from the gutter as a boy and shaped me into a killer. Marco Rinaldi. The man whose family had been systematically destroyed by Alessandro Marino 2 decades ago. This wasn't business. This was vengeance, served colder than the grave. Now, standing in the Don's sanctum, I listened as he toasted his daughter's name. My target. To the bloodline, the Don declared, raising his glass. To the bloodline, the capos echoed, their voices a unified chorus of devotion. I remained silent, a ghost in the corner, my mind a cold ledger of facts and objectives. Infiltrate. Gain trust. Assassinate. Eliminate. The plan was flawless, my cover impenetrable. Emotion was a liability I had discarded long ago. It was the weakness that got men killed, the flaw in the steel that caused the blade to shatter. After the toast, the capos began to file out, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Soon, only the Don and I remained. The silence that fell was heavy, expectant. They fear the Rinaldis, Perlo, the Don said, not turning to face me. He stared at a large, framed portrait on the wall, a woman with sad, gentle eyes. His late wife. Valentina's mother. They are good men, but their fear makes them weak. Fear can be a useful tool, Don Marino, I replied, my voice even and low. He finally turned, a faint, humorless smile on his lips. Indeed. Which is why I have you. He walked towards me, stopping so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, the same one I'd taken the bullet graze on. My daughter, she is like her mother. Headstrong. She sees the world in colors I no longer remember. She doesn't understand the nature of the beasts that prowl outside these walls. He was studying me, his gaze intense, searching. I kept my expression neutral, a mask of unwavering calm. She has been disobeying me, he continued, his grip tightening slightly. Attending events. Acting as if she were not the daughter of a king at war. Her recklessness will be her undoing. This was it. The door opening. I need someone watching her who cannot be bought, cannot be swayed, and cannot be intimidated, the Don said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I need a shadow for her as you are for me. Someone who understands that her life is more valuable than his own. He was offering me the key to the final lock. Direct access to the secondary target. Rinaldi would be pleased. The timeline for the mission would accelerate dramatically. My mind was already calculating the logistics, the opportunities, the kill scenarios. It was perfect. But as I prepared to give my assent, a thought, unwelcome and sharp, pierced through the cold calculus of my mission. It was a simple, dangerous question. What kind of woman inspired this level of fierce, almost sacred devotion in a man as ruthless as Alessandro Marino? What kind of woman was Valentina? The file described her as spoiled, complicit in her father's empire, and a true Marino at heart. But the Don spoke of her as if she were something else entirely. Something fragile. Something pure. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty. A variable I hadn't accounted for. I pushed it down, crushing it before it could take hold. She was the target. Nothing more. I will protect her with my life, Don Marino, I swore. The lie slid from my tongue as easily as a blade from its sheath. He nodded, satisfied. I know you will. He turned and walked back to his desk, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I gave a slight, respectful bow and retreated, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. As I walked away, the Don's study door closing softly behind me, a final thought echoed in the silent, empty corridors of my mind. It was a thought that felt less like a strategy and more like a premonition, a whisper of a truth I was not yet ready to face. Rinaldi had told me to kill a monster and his heir. But the hardest part of killing the devil, I was beginning to realize, might be discovering he has a daughter worth saving. The silence in Valentina Moreno's bedroom was a physical weight. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a tomb, beautiful and dead. Sunlight, thick with the haze of Naples, poured through the floor-to-ceiling window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like captured stars. The window, she knew, was 3 inches of ballistic glass, capable of stopping a rifle round. It offered a breathtaking panorama of the city, a vibrant, chaotic world of noise, life, and freedom that might as well have been a painting. She could see it, but she could never touch it. Her room was a gilded cage, decorated with the emotionless precision of a luxury hotel suite. Priceless art adorned the silk-lined walls, a grand piano sat untouched in the corner, and an easel stood near the window, a blank canvas mocking her with its pristine surface. She hadn't painted in months. How could she paint life when she wasn't living it? At 25, Valentina felt more like a state secret than a daughter. She was her father's greatest treasure, and his most vulnerable asset, and the two were indistinguishable. Her life was a meticulously curated schedule of private tutors, vetted companions, and chaperoned excursions to places so secure they felt like extensions of her prison. A soft buzz from the phone on her nightstand broke the sterile quiet. She glanced at the screen, a familiar ache of longing tightening her chest. It was a message from Isabella, a friend from a life that felt a lifetime away. "Gala tonight. Everyone will be there. Don't let him cage you, Vale. Just for one night." Isabella didn't understand. No one did. To them, her father was a powerful, respected businessman. To her, he was a king, and his love was a fortress from which there was no escape. She typed a reply, her thumb hovering over the screen. "I can't. You know I can't." But she didn't send it. Instead, a spark of the old fire, the defiance her father so often lamented, ignited within her. One night. What was one night? A few hours of breathing air that wasn't filtered through her father's paranoia. A moment to wear a beautiful dress and feel the anonymous thrill of a crowded room. A chance to remember the person she was before she became a symbol, a bloodline, a legacy. She looked at the blank canvas, then back at the sprawling city beyond the glass. The decision was made. Tonight she would not be a prisoner. She would be a ghost, slipping through the bars of her cage for just a little while. The clock in Don Alessandro's study ticked with the finality of a judge's gavel. It was past 2 in the morning, and Valentina stood before her father, the shimmering fabric of her stolen evening gown feeling like a shroud. The faint scent of champagne and perfume clung to her, a foreign fragrance in this den of smoke and steel. Her father wasn't yelling. It would have been better if he were. Instead, he was unnervingly calm, his eyes cold and disappointed. "A charity gala," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "You think our enemies donate to orphans before putting a bullet in my daughter's head? You were told to stay home." "I am not a porcelain doll, Papa," she retorted, her voice trembling slightly but holding firm. "I am suffocating. I needed one night to feel normal." "Normal gets you killed," he snapped, the calm facade cracking. "Your mother, God rest her soul, never understood that. Her desire for normal is what put her in the ground. This childish rebellion ends now." He gestured to the doorway, where a figure had been standing in the shadows, silent and unseen. The man stepped forward into the lamplight, and the atmosphere in the room instantly chilled. He was tall and lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was a study in stoicism, handsome but utterly devoid of warmth, and his eyes were a flat, dispassionate gray. They met hers for a moment, and she felt a profound, unnerving emptiness in their depths, like looking into a well that had long run dry. "This is Perlo de Luca," her father announced. "From this moment on, he does not leave your side. He is your shadow. He is my will. You will treat him with respect." Valentina's fear curdled into a hot, bitter anger. This was her punishment. Not a lecture, not confinement, but a warden. A walking, breathing symbol of her imprisonment. She looked the man up and down with open contempt. "You bought me a new dog," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "How thoughtful. Does he do tricks?" The man's expression didn't flicker. He didn't react to her insult, her anger, or her presence. It was as if she were merely a piece of the architecture. When he finally spoke, his voice was as devoid of emotion as his face, calm, steady, and chillingly absolute. "I keep you alive," Perlo de Luca said. "That is the only trick that matters." The next day, the armored sedan moved through the city like a shark through murky water. Valentina stared out the window, the streets of Naples a blur of color and life. The silence inside the car was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from her resentment and his indifference. He sat in the front passenger seat, a silent sentinel, his gaze fixed forward, but his attention, she knew, was on everything. He saw a monster, I thought, my reflection a faint ghost on the polished dashboard. A tool of her father's control. She wasn't wrong. But she had no idea which monster I truly was. My objective was simple: keep her alive long enough to lull the Don into a false sense of security. Her death had to be strategic, a final, devastating blow after her father was gone. Protecting her was a bitter irony, a necessary step in the intricate dance of betrayal. She was a means to an end. I repeated the words in my mind, a mantra to keep the mission pure. She is a means to an end. The screech of tires was the only warning. A black sedan shot out of a narrow alleyway, a predator lunging from the shadows. The impact was a brutal, deafening crunch of metal on metal, throwing me forward against my seatbelt. Valentina cried out in the back, a sharp gasp of terror. The world dissolved into chaos. Before the car had even settled, the distinctive crackle of automatic gunfire erupted. The rear window spiderwebbed and then imploded, spraying a fine mist of tempered glass into the cabin. The driver grunted, a wet, final sound, and slumped over the wheel. My training took over. There was no thought, only instinct. Pure, lethal reaction honed over 1,000 simulated attacks and a dozen real ones. I unlatched my seatbelt, drawing my SIG Sauer in a single, fluid motion. The attackers were closing in, Rinaldi's men, sent to test me, to ensure my loyalty to the mission was still absolute. My orders had been clear: in a compromised situation, eliminate the liability. Let her die. I threw myself over the seat into the back, my body covering hers, shielding her from the incoming rounds that hammered against the car's armored frame like a furious hailstorm. The impacts were dull, heavy thuds that vibrated through my bones. She was trembling beneath me, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "Stay down!" I commanded, my voice a harsh bark. I kicked the reinforced door open, using it as a shield, and returned fire. My first 2 shots were precise, clinical. One attacker dropped, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. A second stumbled back, clutching his throat. A third, masked and armed with a submachine gun, took cover behind their sedan. I had a clean shot. A clear line of sight to his head. My finger tightened on the trigger. My mind screamed the order: hesitate. Show them you're one of them. Let him escape. But another part of me, a deeper, more primal instinct I didn't recognize, screamed louder. The man was aiming at the open door. At her. For a single, fatal heartbeat, I was frozen. My mission and my instinct were at war. The cold logic of Lucian Rosa battled the protective fury of Perlo de Luca. The attacker saw my pause. He took his chance, scrambling away and disappearing into the panicked lunchtime crowd. A ghost gone. My focus snapped back to the immediate threat. To her. I turned, my gun still raised, my heart hammering against my ribs with a ferocity that felt foreign. Valentina was huddled on the floor, her eyes wide with terror. But as she looked at me, the terror was mixed with something else. A question. She had seen it. She had seen that split second of indecision. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. She shook her head, unable to speak. The wail of distant sirens began to cut through the afternoon air. Back at the Marino estate, the controlled calm had been shattered. Guards swarmed the grounds, their faces grim. The Don was a tempest of controlled rage, his voice cutting through the chaos as he issued a storm of orders. I stood across the grand foyer, giving a clipped, factual report to a capo. I felt detached, my mind replaying the ambush, analyzing my failure. The hesitation. It was a mistake. A rookie error that could have compromised everything. Rinaldi would demand an explanation. Valentina was wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic checking her for injuries. But she wasn't looking at the paramedic. She was looking at me. Her gaze was intense, analytical. She wasn't seeing the hero or the bodyguard. She was seeing the man from the car, the one who had hesitated. And then she saw it. My hand, hanging at my side where I thought no one could see. It was trembling. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor, the only outward sign of the war still raging within me. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a raw, unfamiliar surge of something. Not guilt. Not fear. Something else. Her expression shifted. The contempt was gone, replaced by a dawning, dangerous curiosity. She had seen the crack in the machine. In that moment, the mission began to fracture, I realized, a cold dread washing over me. I was sent to be her executioner. But I had just become her shield. And for the first time, I felt the weight of both. The lie was becoming real. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was going to get me killed. The drive south was a long, tense affair, conducted in the dead of night. We traded the suffocating density of Lagos for the dark, winding roads that hugged the coastline, the air growing thick and salty. Valentina hadn't spoken a word since her father had informed her she was being moved. She simply packed a single bag with a cold, quiet fury and followed my lead. Her silence was a weapon, honed and sharp, and she wielded it with precision. I didn't mind. Silence was my native language. Her father had agreed to my recommendation without question. The ambush proved the Lagos estate was compromised. A secluded, off-the-books property was the only logical solution. It was a sound strategic assessment, but it was also a lie. The estate wasn't compromised. My mission was. I needed to get her away from her father's world, away from prying eyes. I needed isolation to regain control of the situation, to reassert the cold calculus of the objective over the treacherous, unfamiliar static that had filled my head since the attack. I was protecting the mission from her, not the other way around. Or so I told myself. We arrived just before dawn. The safe house was a modern villa carved into a cliffside overlooking the Atlantic, a stark structure of glass and white concrete against the rugged landscape. It was a place of severe, isolated beauty. A place to disappear. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the churning water, I watched Valentina take it in. I expected defiance, anger, another barb about her new cage. Instead, her shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, and a look of profound weariness settled on her features. This wasn't just another cage. It was a more beautiful, more lonely one. The first few days were a war of attrition fought in silence. I established a perimeter, checked security systems, and maintained a constant, unobtrusive watch. She explored the villa like a restless phantom, moving from room to room, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty spaces. She'd stand for an hour on the terrace, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, a sentinel of her own solitude. She tested me, of course. She would appear suddenly in a doorway when I was cleaning my weapon, or ask a pointed question from behind me. "Do you have a family, Perlo? Or did you spring fully formed from my father's paranoia? My only concern is you," I would reply, my voice flat, giving her nothing. Each jab was met with a wall of professional detachment. But I was observing her, too. I saw the way her fingers traced the keys of the dusty grand piano without making a sound. I saw the sketchbook she carried but never opened. I saw the locket she wore, a small, silver oval she would hold in her palm when she thought she was alone. She was a collection of fractured wants, a life unlived, and the closer I watched, the more the black and white caricature from Rinaldi's file dissolved into a creature of frustrating, compelling complexity. On the third night, I sat on the terrace, the glow of my encrypted laptop casting a pale blue light on my face. It was time to report to Rinaldi. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought of the ambush, of my hesitation. I thought of the tremor in my hand and the way Valentina had seen it. I typed. Subject, asset secure. Attack was low-level, opportunistic. Intended to intimidate, not eliminate. Asset is contained and unaware of the mission's true nature. Maintaining protocol. Will advise. Every word was a calculated lie. It wasn't opportunistic, it was a test. And I was no longer maintaining protocol. I was improvising, building a wall not just around Valentina, but around my own inexplicable failure. I hit send, severing the connection, the lie floating out into the ether. For the first time in my career, I had deliberately falsified a report. The act felt both treasonous and necessary. The storm rolled in on the fifth day, a brooding mass of dark clouds that swallowed the sun and turned the sea into a churning cauldron of gray. The wind howled, rattling the vast panes of glass, and the rain came down in relentless, driving sheets. The world beyond the villa vanished behind a curtain of water. We were utterly, completely alone, trapped in the belly of the storm. The power went out just after dusk, plunging the villa into a sudden, disorienting darkness. The emergency generator kicked in moments later, bathing the main room in a low, flickering light. I found Valentina standing by the window, her silhouette framed by a flash of distant lightning. The piano beside her was open. "My mother loved storms," she said, her voice quiet, barely audible over the raging wind. She didn't turn to look at me. She said they were the world's way of washing itself clean. I said nothing, simply stood in the shadows and listened. She used to play the piano during storms. Chopin. She said his music sounded like the rain. My father hated it. He said music made people soft. Weak. She finally turned, her eyes finding mine in the dim, unsteady light. "Do you think love is a weakness, Perlo?" The question was a direct hit, a sniper's bullet finding its mark. It was the core of her father's philosophy, the foundation of his empire. It was, until recently, the central tenet of my own existence. "It can be," I answered, my voice a low rasp. "It can be a leverage point. Something for your enemies to use against you. So it's better to feel nothing? To be a machine like you?" There was no malice in her question now, only a raw, genuine curiosity. "A machine doesn't get compromised," I said. "A machine completes the mission." She gave a sad, faint smile. "And what is your mission? To be my father's golem? To follow his orders until you rust away?" She walked towards me, her movements graceful in the flickering light. "The men who attacked us," you hesitated. Just for a second. I saw it. A machine wouldn't have hesitated. I remained still, my expression unreadable, but my heart hammered against my ribs. She stopped a few feet from me. "You were injured in the attack, weren't you?" "It was nothing." "Let me see," she insisted, her voice soft but firm. Before I could protest, her eyes drifted down to my side. A small, dark stain was blooming on the fabric of my gray shirt, a wound I'd stitched myself and thought I had hidden. The violent motion of the drive and the constant patrols had reopened it. "That is not nothing," she whispered. She went to the kitchen, returning with a first aid kit and a basin of warm water. "Sit down." It was an order, and for the first time, I found myself obeying an authority other than the Don or Rinaldi. I sat on the edge of the large sofa, the storm raging outside, a mirror of the tempest inside me. Valentina knelt before me, her expression focused. She gently lifted my shirt, her fingers brushing against my skin. The touch was electric, a jolt that went straight through my defenses. The wound was a ragged gash along my ribs, crudely stitched and inflamed. A piece of shrapnel from the car door. She worked with a delicate, practiced touch, cleaning the wound, her brow furrowed in concentration. The scent of her, something subtle, like rain and vanilla, filled the space between us. I watched her, the stoic mask of Perlo de Luca beginning to crumble under the weight of this simple, human act. "He never let me learn things like this," she murmured, applying an antiseptic that made me hiss in a sharp intake of breath. "He said a Marino pays for doctors, we don't act like them. My mother taught me in secret. She said the most important skill in our world was knowing how to put things back together." When she finished dressing the wound, she looked up, her face just inches from mine. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, searched mine, looking past the killer, past the guard, searching for the man underneath. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, freezing the moment in a stark, brilliant white. The roar of thunder followed, shaking the very foundations of the villa. In that moment, suspended between the storm without and the storm within, the mission, the lies, and the years of disciplined detachment all fell away. There was only the rain, the thunder, and her eyes. I saw not a target, but a woman. A woman who saw a crack in my armor and instead of exploiting it, was trying to mend it. The space between us was charged, a current of unspoken, dangerous possibility. My hand lifted, an involuntary act, my fingers wanting to touch her cheek, to confirm she was real. But I stopped myself, my fist clenching at my side. The storm began to subside, its fury spent. The rain softened to a gentle patter against the glass. The air in the room was still, but everything had changed. She slowly stood up, breaking the spell, her cheeks faintly flushed. The storm broke, and in its wake, it left a world scrubbed clean and unnervingly quiet. The air in the villa, once thick with unspoken hostility, was now thin and fragile, charged with a different kind of tension. The walls that had separated us had been breached, and we were left to navigate the wreckage. We began to exist in a state of fragile truce. I would find her in the mornings on the terrace, a sketchbook finally opened on her lap, a charcoal pencil moving with a fluid, forgotten grace across the page. She drew the sea, the cliffs, the shape of the clouds, anything but me. I became a silent observer of her quiet acts of creation. We shared meals without the pretense of her being a prisoner, and me her guard. We were simply two people in a house, an island of two in a world that wanted us both dead for different reasons. One afternoon, I was cleaning my weapon at the dining table, the parts laid out on a soft cloth with surgical precision, when she approached. She didn't speak, just sat opposite me and watched, her chin resting in her palm. The silence wasn't a challenge, it was an invitation. "Why do you do it?" she asked, her voice soft. "Serve him?" "My father." I paused, my fingers still on the cold steel of the slide. "He gave me a purpose when I had none." The lie was well rehearsed, but for the first time, it felt like ash in my mouth. "And this is the purpose you wanted?" she pressed, her gaze falling to the gun parts. "To be a weapon?" "It's the one I was given." She looked at me for a long moment, her honey-colored eyes searching for a truth I could not give her. "I think," she said slowly, "that you were given the wrong one." Before I could formulate a response, the laptop on the counter chimed softly. It was an encrypted notification, a sound I hadn't heard in days, a digital heartbeat from a world I was trying to forget. A message from Marco Rinaldi. Valentina glanced at the laptop, then back at me. A flicker of the old suspicion returned to her eyes. I excused myself, my movements stiff, and carried the laptop onto the terrace, closing the glass door behind me. The sea air was cool, but a cold sweat was already prickling my neck. With a sense of dread, I opened the message. There was no preamble. No code. Just a few lines of brutal, unvarnished text that seemed to burn on the screen. Subject: patience has expired. Your reports are insufficient. The timeline has changed. Kill them both. Start with the father. Make it public. Then find the girl and finish it. This is your final directive. Fail, and I will send a team to complete the task. And they will start with her, Lucian. I will make sure her death is a lesson in the price of betrayal. Lucian. He had used my real name. It wasn't just an order, it was a threat, a leash yanked so hard it was meant to choke. He was reminding me who I was, who I belonged to. The fragile piece of the last few days shattered into a million pieces. The ghost of Perlo de Luca evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard reality of Lucian Rosa, the assassin, and the woman in the other room, his target. I closed the laptop, my knuckles white. My carefully constructed wall of lies was crumbling, and Rinaldi was about to bring it down with a sledgehammer. The air felt thin, hard to breathe. I looked through the glass and saw Valentina watching me, her brow furrowed with concern. I turned away, unable to meet her gaze. The days that followed were a descent into a private hell. The truce was broken. I became a ghost again, but a haunted one. I patrolled the villa's perimeter with a restless, predatory energy, my hand never far from my weapon. I barely ate. I didn't sleep. The silence between us returned, but now it was jagged and painful, filled with the words Rinaldi had seared into my brain. They will start with her. Valentina felt the change immediately. The machine was back, colder and more distant than ever. I saw the hurt and confusion in her eyes every time I brushed past her with a clipped, impersonal response. I was pushing her away, trying to rebuild the professional distance, trying to see her as the asset again. But it was impossible. The memory of her touch as she dressed my wound, the sound of her voice in the stormy darkness, these things were now a part of me, a poison to the mission. One evening, I found myself standing on the edge of the cliffs, the wind whipping at my clothes, the sea a violent, churning gray far below. It was a place of finality, a drop into oblivion. I stared into the abyss, feeling a kinship with its chaotic depths. This was my choice: betray the woman who was inexplicably healing me, or betray the man who had created me. Either way, I was damned. What are you running from, Perlo? Her voice cut through the howl of the wind. She had followed me, her dark hair a wild banner in the gale. She stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze unwavering. You've been a ghost since that message arrived, she said, her voice strained to be heard over the roar of the waves. The man I saw during the storm, he's gone. What did it say? What did my father order you to do? I turned to face her, the torment inside me so immense I felt my carefully constructed mask begin to splinter. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to confess everything, to warn her, to throw myself at her mercy. But what would I say? My name is not Perlo. I was sent here to kill you. And I think I'm falling in love with you instead. It was madness. It's nothing that concerns you, I said, my voice a harsh rasp. Everything you do concerns me, she cried, taking a step closer. You are my shadow, my warden, my protector. Don't lie to me. I see the way you look at me. I see the way you look at the sea. Like you're choosing which one will drown you first. I had no answer. My silence was a confession, and she saw it. The anger in her eyes softened into a look of profound sorrow. She knew, not the facts, but the truth of it. She knew I was trapped in a hell of my own making. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air between us for a moment before she let it drop. She turned and walked back to the villa, leaving me alone on the precipice. That night, sleep finally claimed me, but it offered no respite. It dragged me down into a nightmare so vivid it felt more real than my waking hours. I was in her room. She was asleep, the moonlight painting her face in shades of silver and shadow. The locket was resting on her collarbone, rising and falling with each gentle breath. My hand was steady, my heart was silent. I was Lucian Rosa. The mission was all that mattered. I held a pillow in my hands, its softness a stark contrast to the brutal finality of the act. I moved towards the bed. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They found mine in the darkness. There was no fear in them. Only a deep, soul-shattering disappointment. She whispered a single word. Lucian. I woke with a violent gasp, drenched in sweat, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. The name was still on my lips. In the dream, she had known. She had looked at her killer and seen the real man. The horror of it was a physical blow, leaving me breathless. I stumbled out of my room, out of the house, and into the cold night air. This was the end. I couldn't do it. I would not be the monster in her final moments. My bare feet found the rocky path leading down towards a small, secluded cove. The encrypted phone, my link to Rinaldi, felt like a burning coal in my pocket. It was a chain, binding me to a life I could no longer lead, to an order I would not obey. I took it out. For a moment, I stared at the dark screen, the reflection of my own tormented face looking back at me. Then, with a guttural roar that was torn from the very depths of my soul, I hurled it against the jagged rocks. It shattered, the sound swallowed by the crashing waves. I threw it again and again, smashing the pieces, grinding them under my heel until there was nothing left but a glittering dust of plastic and circuits. It was over. I had made my choice. I had severed the tie. But I was a fool to think it would be so simple. Miles away, in a sterile, minimalist office in Milan, Marco Rinaldi lowered his own phone, a cruel, satisfied smile gracing his thin lips. The tracking signal from Lucian's device had gone dead, precisely at the location he had expected. The betrayal was confirmed. He turned to his assistant. He made his choice. It's a shame. He was my finest creation. He picked up a new, untraceable burner phone and composed a short, anonymous text message. He sent it to a number he had acquired long ago, the number of one of Don Alessandro's most trusted and most ambitious capos. The message contained no threat, no explanation. Just a photograph and a name. The destruction of the phone was not an act of strategy. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, a severing of a gangrenous limb. In the days that followed, a fragile, unspoken peace settled over the villa. With the digital link to my old life gone, the oppressive weight of Rinaldi's expectations lifted, and for the first time, I could breathe the same air as Valentina without feeling like a condemned man. We fell into a quiet rhythm, two castaways on a concrete island. The emotional walls between us, already cracked by the storm, crumbled into dust. She taught me the names of the constellations visible from the terrace, her voice a soft murmur against the backdrop of the waves. I, in turn, showed her the basics of disarming an opponent, my hands guiding her wrists, the contact sending a jolt through both of us that had nothing to do with self-defense. She began to paint again. She set up her easel on the veranda, and for hours she would lose herself in strokes of charcoal and color, capturing the wild, untamed beauty of the coastline. She was painting life back into herself, and I was her silent, captive audience. I saw the woman she was meant to be, stripped of the merino name, fierce, creative, and incandescently alive. I allowed myself to believe, in that small pocket of stolen time, that we could exist like this forever. That Perlo De Luca, the bodyguard, could be a real person. That the ghost of Lucian Rosa was well and truly buried beneath the shattered remains of a phone on a rocky shore. It was a beautiful, foolish lie. The summons came on a sun-drenched afternoon. My new, clean phone, provided by the Don's men for secure communication, buzzed with a single, encrypted text. Return to Lagos. Now. Both of you. It's time to come home. A cold dread snaked its way around my heart. There was no explanation, no context. Just a command. The fragile bubble we had built was about to burst. Valentina saw the look on my face. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her paintbrush. "Your father. He wants us back at the estate." Her face fell, the light in her eyes dimming. The piece was over. Why? He didn't say. But I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Destroying the phone was an act of rebellion, but it was also a tactical blunder. It was an admission of guilt. Rinaldi would not have taken it lying down. He would have seen it as a declaration of war, and his first move would be to burn the ground beneath my feet. The drive back was the funeral procession for the life we had briefly known. Valentina stared out the window, her hand protectively covering the locket at her throat. I drove, my senses on high alert, scanning every intersection, every vehicle for a threat. But I knew the real danger wasn't on the road. It was waiting for us at our destination. The Marino estate was eerily quiet when we arrived. The usual swarm of guards was absent from the grand entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open before we reached them, revealing two of the Don's most senior capos. Their faces were grim, their eyes hard. They didn't greet Valentina. They looked only at me. "The Don is waiting for you in his study," one of them said, his tone devoid of its usual deference. "Both of you." Every instinct screamed trap. My hand twitched, wanting to go for the weapon concealed at the small of my back, to grab Valentina and run. But where would we go? Rinaldi on one side, the Don on the other. My past and my present, both poised to kill me. There was no escape, only a reckoning. I gave Valentina a reassuring nod I did not feel and followed the guards through the marbled halls. The house felt cold, lifeless. When we reached the study, the capos opened the doors and motioned for us to enter. Then they stepped back, closing the doors behind us with a heavy, final thud. Don Alessandro Marino stood by the fireplace, his back to us. The fire was not lit. He was a silhouette against the dark, unyielding stone. "Papa?" Valentina's voice was uncertain. "What is this? Why is everyone—" He turned slowly. His face was a mask of glacial calm, but his eyes were burning with a cold, white-hot fury that was more terrifying than any outburst. He wasn't looking at his daughter. His entire, lethal focus was on me. "Leave us, Valentina," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "No," she said, stepping forward. "Not until you tell me what's going on." The Don's gaze flickered to her, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, before it settled back on me. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "For years," he began, his voice a low growl, "I have built this empire on one principle: loyalty. Blood and loyalty. It is the foundation of our world. Betrayal is a cancer. It must be cut out, burned away, lest it poison everything." He was circling me now, like a shark. I stood my ground, my body rigid, my mind racing, preparing for the inevitable. "I took you in," he continued, his voice laced with venom. "I trusted you. I put the life of my own daughter, my blood, my legacy, in your hands. I saw you as a son." He stopped directly in front of me. "You thought I wouldn't find out who you really are. Lucian Rosa?" The name hit the air and detonated. It was a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Valentina gasped, a small, wounded sound. Her eyes shot to mine, wide with confusion and disbelief. "Lucian? Papa, what are you talking about?" In that instant, the world narrowed to the space between me and her. The Don, the room, the impending violence, it all faded away. There was only her face, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for me to deny it, to tell her it was all a horrible mistake. Before I could speak, the side doors to the study burst open. 4 guards stormed in, their movements swift and brutal. I reacted on instinct, shoving Valentina behind me, but I was too slow, too exposed. They swarmed me, a blur of fists and brute force. I landed one punch, then another, but it was hopeless. A heavy blow connected with the back of my head, and the world exploded in a shower of white stars. I hit the floor, my breath knocked out of me, a boot pressing down hard on my neck. "No!" Valentina screamed, lunging forward, but one of the capos caught her, holding her back as she struggled. "Papa, stop it! Stop it!" I looked up, my vision swimming. I could see her fighting against the guard's grip, her face a mask of terror and heartbreak. "Tell me it's not true, Perlo," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Tell me he's lying!" The Don walked over and crouched down, grabbing a handful of my hair and yanking my head up so I was forced to look at her. Blood trickled from my lip, a warm, metallic taste. "Tell her," the Don hissed in my ear. "Tell her who you are." This was it. The moment of truth. I could lie, try to fight, try to deny it. But for what? The game was over. The only thing I had left, the only thing that mattered, was the truth. Her truth. My eyes found hers. "He's not lying," I said, my voice a broken rasp. Her struggles ceased. Her body went limp in the capo's arms, her expression shattering. "What?" she whispered. "My name is Lucian Rosa," I confessed, the words tasting like poison. "I work for Marco Rinaldi. I was sent to infiltrate your family. To gain your trust." I paused, the next words the hardest I'd ever had to say. "My mission was to assassinate your father, and then you." A sob tore from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It was a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my miserable life. "But," she choked out, shaking her head in denial. "The ambush, you saved me. That was the moment the mission failed," I said, my gaze locked on hers, trying to pour every ounce of truth I had left into my words. "I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Everything I was sent to do was a lie, Valentina. But what happened between us in that house, that was real. I swear to you, that was the only thing that was real." Her father let go of my hair, my head thudding back against the marble floor. He stood up, a look of profound disgust on his face. "You see?" he said to his daughter, his voice laced with triumph and sorrow. "This is what happens when you let emotion cloud your judgment. Love. It is not a strength. It is a cancer. It is the weakness that kills empires." He turned to the guards. "Take him to the cellar. I will deal with him myself." They hauled me to my feet. I didn't resist. As they dragged me from the room, my eyes met Valentina's one last time. I saw a soul torn in two, the woman who had tended my wounds, and the daughter of the man I had come to kill. The cellar was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old wine. It was the same room where, years ago, I had sworn a blood oath of loyalty to Don Alessandro. Now, it was my execution chamber. They beat me, a methodical, dispassionate punishment designed not to kill, but to break. When they were done, they chained my wrists to a thick pipe on the wall and left me in the darkness. I don't know how much time passed. An hour. A day. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only pain, darkness, and the echoing sound of her sob. Then I heard it. The soft scrape of a key in the heavy lock. The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of light into the darkness. A figure stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the light. Valentina. She closed the door behind her, plunging us back into near-total darkness. She didn't speak. I could hear her ragged breathing, feel her presence in the small, cold space. "Was any of it real?" she finally whispered, her voice fragile, broken. "All of it," I answered, my own voice a raw whisper. "The storm. The cliffs. Every moment." She took a hesitant step closer. "The man I knew in that house, or the man who came to kill my family? Which one are you?" "I was him," I said, the chains clinking as I shifted my weight. But then I met you. And he started to disappear. She was silent for a long time. I could feel her conflict, the war between her heart and her bloodline. She was her father's daughter, raised on a code of loyalty and vengeance. But she was also the woman who had played Chopin in a storm, who had sketched the sea because it felt free. She took another step, and her hand found my face in the dark. Her fingers were trembling as they gently traced the fresh cuts and bruises. She wasn't healing me this time. She was cataloging the damage. The damage her father had wrought, and the damage. The destruction of the phone was not an act of strategy. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, a severing of a gangrenous limb. In the days that followed, a fragile, unspoken peace settled over the villa. With the digital link to my old life gone, the oppressive weight of Rinaldi's expectations lifted, and for the first time, I could breathe the same air as Valentina without feeling like a condemned man. We fell into a quiet rhythm, two castaways on a concrete island. The emotional walls between us, already cracked by the storm, crumbled into dust. She taught me the names of the constellations visible from the terrace, her voice a soft murmur against the backdrop of the waves. I, in turn, showed her the basics of disarming an opponent, my hands guiding her wrists, the contact sending a jolt through both of us that had nothing to do with self-defense. She began to paint again. She set up her easel on the veranda, and for hours she would lose herself in strokes of charcoal and color, capturing the wild, untamed beauty of the coastline. She was painting life back into herself, and I was her silent, captive audience. I saw the woman she was meant to be, stripped of the merino name, fierce, creative, and incandescently alive. I allowed myself to believe, in that small pocket of stolen time, that we could exist like this forever. That Perlo de Luca, the bodyguard, could be a real person. That the ghost of Lucian Rosa was well and truly buried beneath the shattered remains of a phone on a rocky shore. It was a beautiful, foolish lie. The summons came on a sun-drenched afternoon. My new, clean phone, provided by the Don's men for secure communication, buzzed with a single, encrypted text. Return to Lagos. Now. Both of you. It's time to come home. A cold dread snaked its way around my heart. There was no explanation, no context. Just a command. The fragile bubble we had built was about to burst. Valentina saw the look on my face. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her paintbrush. "Your father. He wants us back at the estate." Her face fell, the light in her eyes dimming. The peace was over. Why? He didn't say. But I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Destroying the phone was an act of rebellion, but it was also a tactical blunder. It was an admission of guilt. Rinaldi would not have taken it lying down. He would have seen it as a declaration of war, and his first move would be to burn the ground beneath my feet. The drive back was the funeral procession for the life we had briefly known. Valentina stared out the window, her hand protectively covering the locket at her throat. I drove, my senses on high alert, scanning every intersection, every vehicle for a threat. But I knew the real danger wasn't on the road. It was waiting for us at our destination. The Merino estate was eerily quiet when we arrived. The usual swarm of guards was absent from the grand entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open before we reached them, revealing two of the Don's most senior capos. Their faces were grim, their eyes hard. They didn't greet Valentina. They looked only at me. "The Don is waiting for you in his study," one of them said, his tone devoid of its usual deference. "Both of you." Every instinct screamed trap. My hand twitched, wanting to go for the weapon concealed at the small of my back, to grab Valentina and run. But where would we go? Rinaldi on one side, the Don on the other. My past and my present, both poised to kill me. There was no escape, only a reckoning. I gave Valentina a reassuring nod I did not feel and followed the guards through the marbled halls. The house felt cold, lifeless. When we reached the study, the capos opened the doors and motioned for us to enter. Then they stepped back, closing the doors behind us with a heavy, final thud. Don Alessandro Moreno stood by the fireplace, his back to us. The fire was not lit. He was a silhouette against the dark, unyielding stone. "Papa?" Valentina's voice was uncertain. "What is this? Why is everyone—" He turned slowly. His face was a mask of glacial calm, but his eyes were burning with a cold, white-hot fury that was more terrifying than any outburst. He wasn't looking at his daughter. His entire, lethal focus was on me. "Leave us, Valentina," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "No," she said, stepping forward. "Not until you tell me what's going on." The Don's gaze flickered to her, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, before it settled back on me. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "For years," he began, his voice a low growl, "I have built this empire on one principle: loyalty. Blood and loyalty. It is the foundation of our world. Betrayal is a cancer. It must be cut out, burned away, lest it poison everything." He was circling me now, like a shark. I stood my ground, my body rigid, my mind racing, preparing for the inevitable. "I took you in," he continued, his voice laced with venom. "I trusted you. I put the life of my own daughter, my blood, my legacy, in your hands. I saw you as a son." He stopped directly in front of me. "You thought I wouldn't find out who you really are. Lucian Rosa?" The name hit the air and detonated. It was a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. Valentina gasped, a small, wounded sound. Her eyes shot to mine, wide with confusion and disbelief. "Lucian? Papa, what are you talking about?" In that instant, the world narrowed to the space between me and her. The dawn, the room, the impending violence, it all faded away. There was only her face, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for me to deny it, to tell her it was all a horrible mistake. Before I could speak, the side doors to the study burst open. 4 guards stormed in, their movements swift and brutal. I reacted on instinct, shoving Valentina behind me, but I was too slow, too exposed. They swarmed me, a blur of fists and brute force. I landed one punch, then another, but it was hopeless. A heavy blow connected with the back of my head, and the world exploded in a shower of white stars. I hit the floor, my breath knocked out of me, a boot pressing down hard on my neck. "No!" Valentina screamed, lunging forward, but one of the capos caught her, holding her back as she struggled. "Papa, stop it! Stop it!" I looked up, my vision swimming. I could see her fighting against the guard's grip, her face a mask of terror and heartbreak. "Tell me it's not true, Perlo," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Tell me he's lying!" The Don walked over and crouched down, grabbing a handful of my hair and yanking my head up so I was forced to look at her. Blood trickled from my lip, a warm, metallic taste. "Tell her," the Don hissed in my ear. "Tell her who you are." This was it. The moment of truth. I could lie, try to fight, try to deny it. But for what? The game was over. The only thing I had left, the only thing that mattered, was the truth. Her truth. My eyes found hers. "He's not lying," I said, my voice a broken rasp. Her struggles ceased. Her body went limp in the capo's arms, her expression shattering. "What?" she whispered. "My name is Lucian Rosa," I confessed, the words tasting like poison. "I work for Marco Rinaldi. I was sent to infiltrate your family. To gain your trust." I paused, the next words the hardest I'd ever had to say. "My mission was to assassinate your father, and then you." A sob tore from her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It was a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my miserable life. "But," she choked out, shaking her head in denial. "The ambush, you saved me. That was the moment the mission failed." I said, my gaze locked on hers, trying to pour every ounce of truth I had left into my words. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. Everything I was sent to do was a lie, Valentina. But what happened between us in that house, that was real. I swear to you, that was the only thing that was real. Her father let go of my hair, my head thudding back against the marble floor. He stood up, a look of profound disgust on his face. You see? He said to his daughter, his voice laced with triumph and sorrow. This is what happens when you let emotion cloud your judgment. Love. It is not a strength. It is a cancer. It is the weakness that kills empires. He turned to the guards. Take him to the cellar. I will deal with him myself. They hauled me to my feet. I didn't resist. As they dragged me from the room, my eyes met Valentina's one last time. I saw a soul torn in two, the woman who had tended my wounds, and the daughter of the man I had come to kill. The cellar was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old wine. It was the same room where, years ago, I had sworn a blood oath of loyalty to Don Alessandro. Now, it was my execution chamber. They beat me, a methodical, dispassionate punishment designed not to kill, but to break. When they were done, they chained my wrists to a thick pipe on the wall and left me in the darkness. I don't know how much time passed. An hour. A day. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only pain, darkness, and the echoing sound of her sob. Then I heard it. The soft scrape of a key in the heavy lock. The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of light into the darkness. A figure stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the light. Valentina. She closed the door behind her, plunging us back into near-total darkness. She didn't speak. I could hear her ragged breathing, feel her presence in the small, cold space. Was any of it real? She finally whispered, her voice fragile, broken. All of it, I answered, my own voice a raw whisper. The storm. The cliffs. Every moment. She took a hesitant step closer. The man I knew in that house, or the man who came to kill my family. Which one are you? I was him, I said, the chains clinking as I shifted my weight. But then I met you. And he started to disappear. She was silent for a long time. I could feel her conflict, the war between her heart and her bloodline. She was her father's daughter, raised on a code of loyalty and vengeance. But she was also the woman who had played Chopin in a storm, who had sketched the sea because it felt free. She took another step, and her hand found my face in the dark. Her fingers were trembling as they gently traced the fresh cuts and bruises. She wasn't healing me this time. She was cataloging the damage. The damage her father had wrought, and the damage. The city of Lagos was a sprawling, incandescent beast, its network of lights a galaxy of chaos against the blackness of the night. Valentina drove through it like a phantom, the black sedan an anonymous vessel in the city's roaring bloodstream. She had no destination in mind, only a desperate, primal need to put distance between them and the pillar of fire that had once been her home. Lucian was a dead weight in the passenger seat, his consciousness flickering. He would surface for a moment, his eyes finding hers, a silent question in their pained depths, before the darkness pulled him under again. The blood spreading across his shirt was a ticking clock, each dark blossom a second closer to the end. She couldn't go to a hospital. A gunshot wound would bring the police, and the police would bring her father's men. Then, a memory surfaced, a fragment from a life she had thought long buried. A story her mother used to tell her about a place of sanctuary, an old Catholic mission tucked away in the quiet, green hills of Ape, an hour outside the city's sprawl. It was run by an Irish priest, a man her mother had known, a man who believed in a mercy that was blind to the sins of the world. It was a fool's hope, a shot in the dark, but it was the only one she had. She found it just as the first hint of dawn was bleeding across the eastern sky, a faint line of gray and rose. The St. Jude mission was a simple, whitewashed compound surrounded by crumbling stone walls, a relic of colonial history nestled amongst palm and mango trees. It was a place of profound and resolute peace, a world away from the violence of the night. An elderly man in a simple brown cassock answered the heavy wooden door. Father Michael was ancient, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were a startling, clear blue, and they held no judgment as they took in the blood-soaked man leaning on Valentina's shoulder. "He needs help," Valentina pleaded, her voice cracking. The priest simply nodded. "Bring him in, child. The Lord's house is open to all who are wounded." They laid Lucian on a narrow cot in a sparse, clean room that smelled of old books and beeswax. Father Michael, it turned out, had been a field medic in a forgotten war long ago, and his hands were steady as he worked. Valentina watched, her heart a cold, tight knot in her chest, as he cleaned the wound and expertly removed the bullet. He stitched the flesh with a practiced efficiency, his movements calm and deliberate in the quiet candlelight. "He is strong," the priest said, his Irish accent a soft burr in the silence. "But the wound is deep. He has lost much blood. He will need rest. And prayer." For 3 days, the mission was their world. The rage of the escape cooled into a slow, simmering anxiety. Lucian drifted in and out of a feverish sleep, muttering names she didn't know and places she couldn't imagine. She never left his side. She bathed his face with cool water, forced sips of broth between his lips, and sat vigil in the quiet dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Nigerian bush, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of a night bird. In those long, silent hours she studied his face, stripped of its stoic mask by pain and fever. She saw the lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. She saw the face of Lucian Rosa, the killer. But she also saw the face of the man who had shielded her with his body, who had listened to her talk about Chopin in a storm, who had looked at her not as a target, but as a person. The two were inseparable now, a paradox of violence and tenderness that she could no longer untangle. He woke on the 4th day. His fever had broken, and his eyes, though clouded with pain, were lucid. They found hers instantly. "Valentina," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. Tears of relief she hadn't known she was holding back streamed down her face. "You're awake. You saved me," he said, a look of wonder in his eyes. "We saved each other," she whispered, her hand finding his. His fingers, though weak, curled around hers, a silent affirmation. The days that followed were a fragile, stolen peace. As his strength slowly returned, they would walk in the mission's walled garden, a wild, overgrown Eden of bougainvillea and hibiscus. They spoke of everything and nothing. She told him about her mother, about her dreams of being a painter, of living in a small, quiet town where the name Marino meant nothing. He spoke of a childhood he barely remembered, an orphan plucked from the streets and forged into a weapon by Marco Rinaldi. He spoke of a life lived in the shadows, a life of assumed identities and unquestioned orders, a life so empty he hadn't realized he was a ghost until he met her. "When this is over," she said one afternoon, her voice full of a desperate, hopeful conviction, "we can disappear. For real. We can go somewhere no one knows us. America, maybe. Or Argentina. You could be anyone you want. I could be me. Just me." He stopped walking and turned to face her. He took her hands in his expression etched with a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. "Valentina, there is no we dot. Don't say that," she pleaded. "After everything we've been through." "That's exactly why," he interrupted gently. "Rinaldi is not like your father. He doesn't operate on ego or family honor. He operates on absolute control. I was his most valuable asset, and I betrayed him. He will never stop hunting me. He will use every resource, every contact to find me. And if you are with me, he will find you too. He will use you to hurt me before he kills us both. We can hide," she insisted, her voice rising with desperation. "We can be careful. There is no hiding from a man like that," he said, his voice firm but full of pain. "The only way for you to be safe, to have that life you want, is for me to disappear. Alone." She knew he was right. The brutal logic of his world was undeniable. But her heart, so recently and so violently awakened, refused to accept it. "You're wrong," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "The only way for me to be safe is to be with you." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a fierce, protective embrace. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt a shudder rack his entire body. "You are the best thing that ever happened in my miserable life, Valentina Marino," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "And I will not be the reason it ends." That night she fell into an exhausted sleep, her hand clutching his, a silent plea for him not to go. She woke to the gray light of dawn. The space beside her on the narrow cot was empty. A cold dread seized her. She sat up, her eyes frantically searching the small room. He was gone. On the small wooden table beside the bed, something glinted in the faint light. It was her locket. The one her mother had given her, the one she had lost during the chaos of the escape. He had found it. He had kept it. And now, he had returned it. It was a goodbye. A final, silent message. She clutched it in her hand, the metal cold against her skin, and a single, wrenching sob escaped her lips. A week later, Father Michael brought her a stack of old newspapers he'd procured from a nearby village. Her hands trembled as she scanned the headlines. The Marino Empire was in chaos. Don Alessandro had declared war on the Rinaldi Syndicate, a brutal, public conflict that was tearing the Lagos underworld apart. Car bombs, targeted assassinations, brazen daytime attacks. Her father was tearing down his own kingdom in a scorched earth campaign of vengeance. There was a picture of her, labeled "Missing, presumed kidnapped." Her escape had been the catalyst for the apocalypse. She continued to scan the pages, her heart pounding, searching for any mention of him. But there was nothing. Perlo de Luca was a ghost. Lucian Rosa didn't exist. Then she saw it. A small article, buried in the international section of the most recent paper. Prominent Milan businessman killed in freak accident. The article was short, maddeningly vague. Marco Rinaldi, CEO of a powerful import-export firm, had been killed when a massive explosion ripped through his private, armored vehicle in the center of Rome. Authorities suspected a gas leak, but were investigating the possibility of foul play. The body was said to be unrecognizable. There were no suspects. No other casualties were reported. The weeks following the news of Marco Rinaldi's death bled into a month, then two. Valentina remained at the St. Jude mission, a ghost haunting its peaceful cloisters. She existed in a state of suspended animation, a world of waiting. But what she was waiting for, she didn't know. For news of Lucian? For her father's men to crash through the gates? For the world she had fled to finally forget her? Father Michael became her silent confidant. He never asked about her past, but he would leave the day's newspapers from Lagos on a small wooden table for her, his own quiet way of keeping her connected to the war she had started. She would read the headlines with a detached, clinical horror. The Marino Empire was not just collapsing, it was being systematically dismembered, devoured by the power vacuum its own implosion had created. Rival outfits, once held in check by her father's iron fist, were now carving up his territories with brutal efficiency. The reports were a litany of violence, gunfights in the bustling markets of Balagan, bodies found in the quiet, wealthy enclaves of Ikwe. Her father's name was mentioned less and less, eventually replaced by the ominous phrase, "The remnants of the former Marino Syndicate." Then, one morning, the final headline appeared. Reputed crime boss, Alessandro Marino, missing, presumed dead. He had vanished. There was no dramatic shootout, no body left for public display. He had simply been erased, swallowed by the chaos he had unleashed. His top lieutenants were either dead or had fled the country. The Empire was officially a corpse, its bones picked clean. Reading the words, Valentina felt not grief, not satisfaction, but a profound and hollow emptiness. Her father, the titan who had shaped and suffocated her entire existence, was gone. The war was over. And she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. She could not stay at the mission forever. It was a sanctuary, but it was not a life. With a heavy heart, she thanked Father Michael, whose kind, unquestioning eyes offered a final, silent blessing. He arranged for a car, and she returned to Lagos. She returned to face the ashes. The Marino estate was a monument to destruction. The grand iron gates, once a symbol of impenetrable power, now hung askew on their hinges, scarred and twisted. The meticulously manicured lawns were overgrown with weeds. And the mansion itself, it was a skeletal ruin. The west wing was a blackened husk, and the main house stood open to the elements, its windows blown out, its white marble walls stained with soot and smoke. She walked through the wreckage of her former life, her footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris. The grand staircase where she had descended in shimmering gowns was a ghost of itself. The study where she had faced her father's wrath was a gaping, fire-gutted maw. It was all gone. Everything she had hated, and everything she had known. In the weeks that followed, lawyers and sterile, downtown boardrooms informed her of the true nature of her inheritance. The estate was a ruin, but the Marino Empire, she learned, was a vast, sprawling hydra with heads in legitimate shipping firms, real estate holdings, and offshore accounts. Her father, for all his paranoia, had legally designated her his sole heir. She was, on paper, one of the wealthiest women in the country. But it was an inheritance written in blood. This was her final crossroads. She could take the money and disappear, run to that small, quiet town she had dreamed of and spend the rest of her life trying to forget. Or she could stay. She could face the legacy of the man who had raised her and the man who had saved her. In the quiet of a rented apartment overlooking the Lagos lagoon, she made her vow. She would not run. She would dismantle her father's empire not with violence, but with paperwork. She would liquidate the assets, sever the ties to its dark origins, and use the fortune to build something new. A foundation. A charity in her mother's name to fund arts and education for the city's forgotten children. She would turn the blood money into a legacy of hope. It was a form of penance, and a form of redemption. It was the only way she could honor the sacrifice Lucian had made. By truly setting herself free. Months passed. A new, quiet routine settled over her. Her days were filled with meetings, legal battles, and the slow, arduous process of transforming a criminal enterprise into a force for good. She no longer looked over her shoulder, no longer expected violence at every turn. The ghosts of her past were fading, replaced by the demanding reality of her present. She had almost allowed herself to believe that the final chapter was written. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between utility bills and bank statements. It was a plain, unmarked brown envelope, cheap and anonymous. There was no return address. No postage stamp, meaning it had been delivered by hand. Her heart, so steady for so long, began to hammer against her ribs. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was light, containing what felt like a single, folded piece of paper and a small, hard object. She took it inside, her breath held tight in her chest. With shaking fingers, she tore it open. The first thing that fell out onto the table was the locket. Her mother's locket. It was tarnished and scratched, the silver dulled from its ordeal, but it was unmistakably hers. She picked it up, her thumb tracing the familiar, worn engraving of a songbird on its surface. It was a tangible piece of him, a final, return piece of herself. Then she unfolded the note. It was a single piece of cheap, lined paper, torn from a notebook. The handwriting was sharp and angular, written with a sense of urgency. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read the words. You were my salvation in a world built for sinners. If I live for you. If I die, let my sins die with me. P. A single tear fell, then another, splashing onto the cheap paper and making the ink bleed slightly. It was everything. A confession, a promise, a goodbye, and a sliver of hope, all in 2 devastatingly simple sentences. If I live. He didn't know. Or maybe he couldn't say. But it was enough. The ambiguity was a gift, a space for hope to grow in the ruins of her past. She closed her eyes, clutching the note and the locket to her chest, the pain and relief a torrent that washed her clean. He had kept his promise. He had found a way to let her know. She stood like that for a long time, the sounds of the city, the distant car horns, the cry of gulls over the lagoon, fading into a distant hum. Then, another sound broke through the morning quiet. It started faint, a low, guttural thrum from the streets below. It grew steadily louder, a familiar, powerful hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The sound of high-performance motorcycles, more than one, moving with speed and purpose through the Lagos traffic. It was the sound of ghosts, of men who moved through the world unseen. Valentina walked to the window, the locket clutched tight in her fist. She looked down at the bustling street, but she couldn't see them. They were just a sound, an echo, a presence felt but not seen. Were they his men? Was it him? Or was it just the ordinary noise of a chaotic city? She would never know. And in that uncertainty, she found a strange and final peace. Wow, what a journey! Thank you so much for watching every chapter of The Devil's Bodyguard. Your comments and support have meant the world. If you loved this story and want to be part of the next one from the very beginning, the best way to do that is by subscribing to the channel. It tells me you want more stories like this, and it ensures you won't miss out. Thank you again for being the best part of this community.